Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into a massive galactic mystery, one that is literally rewriting our understanding of the universe. For the longest time, we thought we had the fundamental history of our galaxy pretty well figured out. We relied on these ancient, massive cosmic structures to serve as our guideposts through time. But recently, advanced space telescopes and some incredible new analytical techniques have completely turned that neat, tidy history on its head. Instead of simple answers, the data is showing us that the universe is far more complex and dynamic than anyone imagined. So we're going to unpack the evidence from a very specific stellar crime scene, see exactly how our standard models fell apart, and figure out what it all means for the future of astronomy. Let's get right into it. To really unravel this, we first have to challenge a rock-solid alibi. See, when astronomers want to understand the Milky Way's history, they look at stellar fossils. These are the ancient relics of the early universe, acting like ultimate cosmic time capsules. For decades, there was this comfortable assumption that the oldest relics in space were simple, straightforward structures. Everyone just kind of assumed that if you looked at one of these fossils, you were getting a perfectly preserved, entirely unaltered snapshot of the exact conditions of our galaxy when it was just an infant. It was an elegant theory, for sure, but as we're about to see, that foundational assumption, it completely breaks down. These stellar fossils are what we call globular clusters. Just as a quick recap of the standard model, these are incredibly dense, spherical groups of stars, all tightly bound together by gravity. Historically, they were neatly boxed into this category called a simple stellar population. The classic textbook model basically told us that every single star inside a globular cluster was born at the exact same time from the exact same massive cloud of gas and dust. They were presumed to be completely uniform. Because of this beautifully simple framework, astronomers confidently use these clusters as straightforward, single-generation fossils to trace the Milky Way's evolution, without ever really worrying about any internal complications. But our crime scene lies exactly 18,300 light-years away from Earth. Now, I know that sounds incredibly far, but in the grand scale of the cosmos, that is practically our galactic backyard. And it's right here that the whole simple, stellar population myth completely shatters. At this relatively close distance, nestled deep within our galaxy, we find a specific cluster that is forcing the astronomical community to tear up those old textbooks. It turns out, when you observe a cluster this closely with modern precision, the straightforward story we accepted for decades starts unraveling incredibly fast. Enter our primary suspect, Caldwell 81, or as it's formally known in the catalogs, NGC 6352. It was actually first spotted way back on May 14, 1826, by astronomer James Dunlop, sitting comfortably down in the southern Orion constellation. Now, what makes Caldwell 81 such a perfect target for our investigation is its profile. It's a highly metal-rich cluster, which is typical for the dense, bustling bulge or thick disk population of the Milky Way. It packs tens of thousands of solar masses into a really tight spherical region, and this single cluster holds the absolute key to proving that these ancient structures are hiding some incredibly complex secrets. So how did the classic model actually fall apart? Well, the first real anomalies popped up in cyanogen markers. Cyanogen is just a chemical molecule made of carbon and nitrogen. But in Caldwell 81, it acts exactly like scattered DNA evidence at a crime scene. Astronomers started noticing that the absorption strength of cyanogen varied wildly from star to star within the cluster. What makes this so weird is that even among stars at the exact same evolutionary stage, stars that should theoretically be identical twins, the chemical readouts were totally erratic. This was undeniable evidence that these stars absolutely did not share the same chemical history. Something profound happened internally to change their makeup. The evidence actually points to a stunning reality, a clear bimodality. Instead of one unified monolithic group of stars, Caldwell 81 is perfectly split into two distinct populations living side by side. On one side, we have population A, or Pop A. Think of this as the first generation of stars. They have a primordial chemical makeup very similar to your standard run-of-the-mill field stars. But then on the other side, we have population B, or Pop B. This is an entire second generation of stars, and they are heavily nitrogen-enhanced with much stronger cyanogen absorption. They are fundamentally chemically different from their older siblings, yet they exist within the exact same gravitational boundaries. We can actually visually fingerprint these two distinct generations using a color magnitude diagram, which basically plots the temperature of stars against their brightness. When you map it out, you get these distinct green and magenta sequences representing Pop A and Pop B.
Rather than blurring together into a single, messy blob, you can see them tracing distinct, parallel sequences right next to each other. They follow the exact same evolutionary branches, moving from the main sequence up to the red giant branch, but they remain clearly divided. It is just stunning visual confirmation of multiple generations living under one roof, which, remember, the old model said was absolutely impossible.
But to properly interrogate these stars and get that crystal-clear visual split, standard ground-based telescopes just weren't cutting it. Earth's atmosphere blurs the exact wavelengths you need to spot these subtle chemical differences. So, astronomers had to bring in the heavy artillery, the Hubble Space Telescope. Specifically, they utilized its highly sensitive ultraviolet filters. We're talking about the F275W, F336W, and particularly the F438W filters. These are exquisitely sensitive to the subtle variations in carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen that divide these two populations. Because they can spot the varying cyano content, they allow us to separate the populations cleanly and definitively.
Of course, once they had this highly sensitive Hubble data, the team didn't just eyeball the results. They processed all this photometry using a sophisticated Bayesian analysis software called BAYESIAN. Because the chemical variations are so incredibly subtle, they needed immense computing power to untangle everything. We can break their intense workflow down into 3 key steps. First, they input the raw Hubble photometric data. Second, they apply complex theoretical stellar models to that dataset. And third, they use all of that to precisely determine the core chemical difference between the stars, most notably figuring out their exact helium proportions.
And that BAYESIAN analysis ultimately revealed the smoking gun of our entire investigation. It showed that population B is enriched with helium by a specific mass fraction difference, a delta Y of 0.029, compared to population A. Now, I know 0.029 sounds like a tiny fractional difference, but in astrophysics, it's massive. It proves that helium is the true driver of the structural differences we're seeing. More importantly, it tells us conclusively that the second generation of stars didn't just form from the same original pristine cloud. They actually formed from the processed, enriched, and recycled material ejected by the massive, dying stars of the very first generation.
When you piece all this data together, it reveals a shockingly tight timeline of events. Imagine this. At year 0, the first stellar generation forms from primordial gas. Then, a mere 5 million years later, which is literally less than a blink of an eye in cosmic terms, the massive and intermediate mass stars from that first group age rapidly and eject their enriched, helium-heavy material into the core of the cluster. And then, only about 10 million years after the first generation was born, the entire second stellar generation forms from that recycled gas. Just 10 million years between the birth of 2 distinct stellar families. It's a breathtakingly fast cycle of cosmic recycling.
And here's the real kicker. Caldwell 81 isn't just an isolated incident. When we map this out for other clusters, like NGC 5024 and NGC 5272 alongside Caldwell 81, we see the exact same split. That unmistakable bimodality shows up in cluster after cluster. As we look across the broader Milky Way, we're realizing this multiple population paradigm isn't a fluke. It seems to be the fundamental rule. Almost ubiquitously, these ancient relics that we once thought were simple, monolithic structures actually harbor multiple distinct generations of stars deeply entwined in a complex history of chemical evolution. Which leaves us with a massive, paradigm-shifting mystery to ponder. For generations, our entire foundational model of galactic evolution was built on the rock-solid assumption that globular clusters were simple, single-generation objects. But now, thanks to clusters like Caldwell 81, we know they are dynamic, multi-generational engines of chemical recycling. So you have to ask yourself, if our absolute oldest stellar fossils are this incredibly complex, what else about the very foundations of the Milky Way's history have we totally misunderstood? It really is a thrilling time for astronomy, and a perfect reminder that the universe always has more profound secrets waiting to be uncovered.